Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to the month of October. Ha ha ha. I also wanted to welcome you to the very first episode of The Spooky Sesh. It's finally October, and it's one of my favorite months of the year. And boy, do I have a lot of spooky content coming your way. Today's video is going to be based off of all of the paranormal, spooky, and haunted podcasts that I listen to on a daily basis. And also, today's video is based off of two of my favorite YouTubers, first and foremost being the lovely Bailey Sarian with her murder mystery and makeup, and also Robert Welsh, who does ghost stories and makeup. Today I will be attempting to do my makeup while also talking about a haunted history or haunted topic, and everything that I use on my face today I will be putting down in the description box below for all of you to check out. Without further ado, all of my ghouls and guys, let's get into today's video. Today we will be discussing the horrific and the very tragic Salem witch trials. So our story today starts during 1630 to 1691 when settlers from England migrated to the New World to the new colonial Massachusetts Bay Area. The New World was mostly an uncharted land that was unfamiliar to settlers that were coming here from Europe, but the land was definitely familiar to those who were native, which were the Massachusetts Indian tribe that currently resided there at the time. So for your guys' learning pleasure, I have a couple of really fun facts here. Massachusetts is an Algonquin Indian word that roughly translates to large hill place or at the great hill, according to some historians. It has been translated differently amongst other historians as well, but this was mainly what I found in my research that was most prominent as a translation. And did you also know that, and I thought this was really interesting, the Great Blue Hill is actually an ancient volcano. It hasn't been active in the last 400 million years. Okay, so prior to the settlers setting sail for the New World, there was actually a sermon that was being held at the docks at Southampton, England. It was being held by Reverend John Cotton. Reverend John Cotton was sort of preaching to the people that they were going on a holy mission, going to the New World. Specifically speaking of the colonial Massachusetts Bay Area, they were being given the task to convert all of the Native American Indians in that particular area to convert to Christianity. So some historians do argue that the self-governing colonies did use and insert religion into the way that they governed their people. And I do feel like that's really important to know for this particular case, just because the way that they handled the cases with the witch trials and the way that they treated these women and the way that they were prosecuting these women. So the Salem witch trials began in the spring of 1692 in Salem Village, which is now known as Salem, Massachusetts. A group of young girls claimed that they were possessed by the devil. Since there were no real governing laws yet, the only existing law was provided, like I said, by the Puritan Church, which demanded that the individual's sins be cleared through public humiliation, which again, I thought that was really interesting information, that you basically have to stand up in front of a group of townspeople and you kind of just have to talk about the sins that you've committed, which is really interesting to me because you're almost humiliated, like they say, by whoever it is that's running this particular, gathering, whether that be like somebody of the church or a religious figure. I mean, it's just really important to know in this case as well, because it just seemed like the townspeople congregated together with the ill young women who were claiming to be possessed by the devil and had all of these like possession-like behaviors. So the young girls that had claimed that they had been possessed by the devil or devil-like entities caused several local women to basically have to go into custody, and it caused a huge wave of mass hysteria of witchcraft across the colonies. Okay, so let's get a little bit deeper into this. The belief in the supernatural, and specifically in the devil's practice of giving a certain human, witches, the power to harm others in return for their loyalty, had emerged in Europe as early as the 14th century. So there were a lot of harsh realities in the rural Puritan community of the Salem village at the time because they were experiencing the after effects of the British war with France in the American colonies in 1689, which actually had a spread of a recent smallpox pandemic, fears of attacks from neighboring Native American tribes, and a long-standing rivalry with the more affluent community of the Salem town, present-day Salem, of course. So in January of 1692, 9-year-old Elizabeth Betty Paris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams, the daughter and niece of Samuel Paris, minister of Salem village, began having fits. Like I mentioned, they were having convulsions and they were contorting their bodies in weird ways, according to the friends and families of these girls. They were vomiting, they had fevers, they were sick. They would literally go still for long periods of time as if they were dead, but they were alive. And then they would go right back into a lot of those convulsions and contortions that they were experiencing. They also experienced crazy outbursts of just screaming and shouting, and the hallucinations that they were experiencing, which I will later get into why I am calling them hallucinations, just sent them through crazy fits that they were experiencing. So William Griggs was a local doctor to that particular colony of the time. He diagnosed basically bewitchment to these girls because there was no other reason that they could figure out why this was happening. There were other younger girls that were starting to experience all of these symptoms. To name a few, here I have the names Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Elizabeth Hubbard, Mary Walcott, and Mary Warren. In late February, arrests were warranted and were issued for the Paris's Caribbean slave. Her name was Tituba, along with 2 other women, the homeless beggar, Sarah Good, and the poor, elderly Sarah Osborne, whom the girls accused of bewitching them. So the 3 accused witches were brought to magistrates John Corwin and John Hawthorne and questioned even as their accusers appeared in the courtroom in a grand display of spasms, contortions, screaming, and writhing. Though Good and Osborne, they denied their guilt. Tituba confessed, and she basically claimed that there were other witches working alongside of her. So as this mass hysteria was spreading throughout the colonies, there were several other women that were convicted of these crimes of witchcraft. Good and Osborne did deny their guilt. There were a couple other townswomen that were accused of being witches, and the 2 of them that were accused, they were actually upstanding members of the church. So the names were Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse, and the 4-year-old daughter of Sarah Good. A 4-year-old? Jeez. So, like Tituba, several accused witches confessed and named still others, and the trials soon began to overwhelm the local justice system. In May of 1692, the newly appointed governor of Massachusetts, William Phips, ordered the establishment of a court of oyer, which means to hear, and terminer, which means to decide. This special court would take on the witchcraft cases for Suffolk, Essex, and Middlesex counties. The court handed down its first conviction, which is Bridget Bishop. On June 2nd, she was hanged 8 days later, what would be known as Gallow Hills in Salem town. 5 more people were hanged that July, 5 more in August, and 8 more in September. Ooh, this eyeshadow palette is so powdery. And while the elderly Giles Corey, which was Martha's husband, was pressed to death by stones after he refused a plea to his arraignment. And just for clarification, Giles Corey was Martha Corey's husband, which I had mentioned earlier that Martha Corey was an upstanding member of the Puritan church. It's just so sad that people were just like, they had no sympathy for humanity. It just makes me so sad to read this and to have done the research on it. You know, it was basically children that weren't even of age were pointing out other people in their like colonies and in their society that they were ill. These girls were very ill, and they were seeing hallucinations of what they thought were witches, and just accusing people, just innocent people. And the townspeople just ran with it. It was just such an awful situation. So Giles Corey, he was charged for witchcraft alongside his wife Martha. And though the respected minister Cotton Mather had warned of the dubious value of spectral evidence or testimony, so spectral evidence is like someone's testimony of having dreams and visions about things that, you know, were in the future or were happening at that time. Increase Mather, he was actually president of Harvard at the time, and he was Minister Cotton Mather's father. So he later joined his son in urging that the standards of evidence of witchcraft needed to be a little bit more fine-tuned. Quoted from Increase Mather, he said that evidence of witchcraft must be equal to those for any other crime, concluding that it would be better than 10 suspected witches that may escape than one innocent person be condemned. We're gonna pause for a moment while I attempt to get my mascara on so I don't poke myself in the eyeball while I'm trying to focus on two things at once here. So later on in October, the Court of Oyer and Terminer had basically been dissolved and mandated that its successor disregard spectral evidence. So they were really against spectral evidence, apparently. The trials had actually continued and were kind of, the intensity of the trials were dwindling down up until 1693. And with that said, May Phipps, he went in and he pardoned all of those that were in jail on witchcraft charges. And in January of 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting for the tragedy of the Salem witch trials, and the court later deemed the trials unlawful. Well, yeah, they were unlawful. The way that they were treating those people was so horrible. The leading justice, Samuel C. Wall, he actually publicly apologized for everything that had happened for the last couple of years and basically his role in the whole process. The community was already just damaged from everything that had happened, and you know, it lingered for a while. It lingered for a really long time, and even to this day, you know, it's still something that people think about, you know, that how humanity can turn on itself. Shortly after that, the Massachusetts colony, they passed a legislation restoring the good names of those people that had been convicted of witchcraft, and they were also provided financial restitution to the families and the heirs in 1711. So before I had mentioned that, you know, these girls were experiencing hallucinations, in 1976, this is very interesting. A study published in the Science magazine cited that the fungus ergot, which is found in rye, wheat, and other cereals, there were toxicologists that said that fungus can cause symptoms of delusions, vomiting, and muscle spasms. It just makes you really sick. There were other times and places in history where the fungus was present. So this is not the first time that this fungus has affected people. It's affected many other people throughout history. So this was just one of those things that people were not familiar with what was happening, and there was no way for them to know that this fungus was affecting them the way that it was. Now, with all of our technologies and all of our science that we have, of course, it is easier for us now to know when that fungus is present in the things that we consume. So don't worry, that is something that is very rare to find in foods these days. I was also, as a part of my research, I did watch, it's called the Salem witch trials. You can find it if you have like the Amazon Fire Stick. Obviously, it's a movie, so it's very dramatic and very dramatized compared to, you know, some of the other historical situations around the Salem witch trials. However, I thought it was very interesting. It really blows my mind how you know, it's possible that people in that time, they were just so fearful of their lives and settling in such a new place that was, like I said, very uncharted and only had Native Americans residing there prior to them. And there was just so much fear of the unknown. So much so that it caused people to go crazy and convict other people and just hang them like it was nothing. So I thought it would be kind of fun while I'm finishing up my makeup to give you guys the origin of witches. I do have my research here right in front of me, so if you notice that I am looking down, it is helping me through while I speak on everything. I don't want to get anything wrong or mixed up. So early witches were people who practiced witchcraft, using magic spells and calling upon spirits for help or to bring about change. Most witches were thought to be pagans doing the devil's work. Many, however, were simply natural healers or so-called wise women, whose choice of profession was pretty much misunderstood. Apparently, it's unclear when witches came onto the historical scene, but one of the earliest records of a witch is in the Bible, in the book of 1 Samuel, thought to be written between 931 BC and 721 BC. It tells the story of when King Saul sought the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help him defeat the Philistine army. So the witch roused Samuel, who then prophesied the death of Saul and his sons. The next day, according to the Bible, Saul's sons died in battle and Saul committed suicide. So, as I had mentioned earlier, witchcraft really came to be in the early 1400s in Europe, and it did really take hold as a hysteria. When many accused witches confessed, often under torture, to a variety of wicked behaviors. Within a century, witch hunts were very common, and most of the accused were executed by burning at the stake or hanging. Single women, widows, and other women on the margins of society were especially targeted. Oh boy, between the years 1500 and 1660, up to 80,000 suspects were put to death in Europe for witchcraft. That's crazy. Around 80% of them were women thought to be in cahoots with the devil and filled with lust. Wow, Germany had the highest witchcraft execution rate while Ireland had the lowest. So there was actually a publication that went viral. It is called Malleus Maleficarum. If I mispronounced that, I do apologize. It was written by two well-respected German Dominicans in 1486. The book, usually translated as The Hammer of Witches, was essentially a guide on how to identify, hunt, and interrogate witches. This publication basically labeled witchcraft as hearsay and quickly became the authority for Protestants and Catholics trying to flush out witches living among them. For more than 100 years, the book sold more copies of any other book in Europe except the Bible. I also got some of my information from the SalemWitchMuseum.com. It's a very cool website. I didn't even know that there was a museum that you could visit that was based around everything that had happened during the Salem witch trials. They have parts of the museum that are set up that represent the historical setup of what it may have looked like during the Salem witch trials, while they were, gathering together in these places and accusing everybody. I have never personally visited Salem, but let me tell you, that is on my bucket list. I am determined to go visit there, and now I'll go visit the museum. I think that's really cool. They do have virtual tours that you can take as well. They do speak a lot, obviously, on the history and the education of the Salem witch trials. So the mission of the Salem Witch Museum is to be the voice of the innocent victims of the Salem witch trials, while also bringing awareness to the root cause of witch hunts from 1692 to the present day. By understanding this history through audiovisual displays, guided tours, educational events, and discussion, they strive to connect this tragedy to the modern world and highlight why history matters. Thank you so much for joining me in my video today. This was definitely something a little bit different than what I normally do. I, moving forward, would love to do more of the Spooky Sesh series. So if you did enjoy today's video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that bell. If you guys have any stories that you'd like to share with me, anything about the paranormal, anything about aliens, Bigfoot, anything weird, please email them to me. I will put in my description box thespookysesh@gmail.com, where you can email me any of your stories if you'd like to be featured in one of my videos. This is something that I would like to move forward with and put out a new video, hopefully every single week. We will see how it works out with my schedule. But until then, stay spooky, my friends, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye, guys.